Hello, I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at J Moore Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live, drop your questions into the comment box and I will check from time to time. You'll see me turn my head. Today's guest is Jennifer Abadi, a researcher, developer, preserver of Sephardic, Mizrahi, Judeo-Arabic recipes and food customs. She is a culinary expert in the Jewish communities of the Middle East, Mediterranean, Central Asia, and North Africa. She is a lecturer and cooking instructor. Her cookbook, memoir, A Fistful of Lentils, Syrian Jewish Recipes from Grandma Fritzi's Kitchen, is now in its third edition. And her second book, Too Good to Pass Over, is more than just Passover recipes from these different areas that she's an expert, the Middle East, Asia, Central Asia, etc. So let's welcome Jennifer.
Thank you, Dara.
Well, I'm so glad that you could squeeze some time for us in. I know how busy you are teaching and everything that you have going on. What is on your plate today other than doing the show?
Well, actually, this is a really busy day for me. I was really trying to figure out how to get through it. You're the kickoff today, so it's a great way to start the day talking about what I do. But this afternoon, as I do now every Thursday and 2 other days, so 3 days a week, I have an after-school cooking class for kids, very young, kindergartners and first graders, in a school on the Upper East Side. And then I have 2 days in a public school nearby. And then I come home and I prepare for a virtual event for a congregation doing a discussion, even though Mimuna is over, it's not been that long, but they weren't able to schedule it before. So I'm doing the post-Passover holiday of Mimuna, doing a lecture about it, a Google slideshow, and preparing mufleta, which is a special Moroccan flatbread. So that's what's on my plate today. And then I have to figure out dinner in between somewhere for everybody.
No idea on food, even though you're entrenched in it all the day. Well, thank you for squeezing us in.
Yeah.
You were just part of Savor Experience. Can you tell
Yes.
us about that?
Oh, Savor. Yeah. So
Savor.
I actually happen to have the CD here. It's a couple of women, Susan Barocas and Sarah Aroeste. Susan is a great Sephardic chef from a Sephardic background, and Sarah also Sephardic, both coming from the background of Monastir, who's a Ladino singer. And the two of them came together to do this project, basically, of bringing Sephardic women chefs from around the world to do one video producing one Sephardic dish. And Sarah sang a Ladino song in the background to it. So she brought basically the Sephardic music and the food together, so that the background is the song and it sings about the actual dish we're making. So I did stuffed grape leaves, a Turkish version of it. And she edited the videos. They both had someone edit the videos, and they're branching out and doing all kinds of things that becomes more like an experience too, where I think they're going to Turkey and Greece this week. So it's a whole new thing that started a year ago. And I was one of the women chefs as a part of that they invited to be a part of this.
Great. I always like to do a little bit of background on my guests. Sometimes I delve a little bit deeper. I know art has played an important part for you. You went to a special high school that featured art as part of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to the University of Pennsylvania, got your degree in art history.
Yes.
That was 1988. What did you do after that?
Well, actually, yes, I majored in fine art in high school. I loved art. I was really driven by it and inspired by my grandmother, was sort of my muse in a way for my first cookbook, my grandma Fritzi from Syria. And she was a painter and an artist all my whole life that I knew her. So I was always interested in fine art. I did that through high school. And in college, I didn't want to major in it. So I took art courses in the grad school, while I ended up majoring in art history, and then took other classes. But it also gave me a chance to, at University of Pennsylvania, they have a great history department, archaeology department, and language department. So I took advantage of that and studied Arabic for 3 years, which to me felt almost like a minor. It was so demanding. It was so much work, even though it wasn't my major or my minor. I took photography. I took all kinds of art courses for my major. And then after I graduated, I went more down the commercial art route. So I was, well, for a year, I didn't know what I was doing. So I just worked at an administrative job. And then eventually I took a few commercial art courses in the city, because we have a lot of very good schools like Pace and Parsons and Pratt and FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology. And I decided I wanted to be a graphic designer and an illustrator. So I did that for maybe like 10 years almost. I did that for 10 years. I was doing both as a freelancer, and I worked in, I think that what really brought me into the food world was, for 2 to 3 years, I landed a full-time freelance job in a very successful cookbook. Well, it was a publishing company called Workman Publishing, and they were known for, and you're nodding your head, they were known for their cookbooks. They really changed the cookbook industry in the way, the style and the format of a cookbook, making it almost very user-friendly with the sidebars and the quotes and sort of personal
Sheila Luckin's
stories.
book.
Yes. And very gifty. Like they did a lot of gift book styles, not just cookbooks. And while working in the art department, that's how I learned not only how to design and lay out a cookbook, but I was inspired. And so on the side, I did my own family cookbook, but really as a portfolio piece. And I took my mother's recipes that she had collected with my aunt, her sister, when they got married, from my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and their aunts, and other family members. And I translated. This was the time where the computer, Apple computer, was just coming in. And so I was sort of using it as a way to also teach myself how to use programs on the computer, on the Mac, like Quark and other design applications, right. Photoshop, Illustrator. And I made my own portfolio cookbook. And then eventually I became more interested and I published it, but we're talking like 8-10 years of time. And then that's how I started teaching Syrian cooking from there. But it was one step leading to another that I didn't necessarily see I was going in that direction.
Right. One thing leads to another as we progress.
Yeah.
And I just want to hold it up. This is the 3rd edition, A Fistful of Lentils. Where did you come up with the title?
Oh, so the title, after for a couple of years, I would go and cook with my grandmother. She had an apartment in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, not far from me. And I would set up cooking dates with her. And I would come with a cart and I'd bring all my ingredients, and I would tell her in advance, after talking with her, okay, I want to work on this recipe when I see you. And she would say, okay, fine, you know. So I would go there with the ingredients, and I would stand and cook with her in the kitchen, and take notes on what she was doing, the steps, and also the measurements as much as I could, right? And my grandmother, like everyone's grandmother, didn't measure anything. And a lot of it was by eye, or she would use a cup, but it wasn't really a cup. Like one day I discovered she had this sort of melted green plastic cup. And then I was like, why does that look so familiar? And it was only when I was doing the laundry that I realized it went to the Tide box of the detergent. And she was using it because she saved everything for lots of reasons. Just because she was a grandmother, but also because she was an artist, and she never knew if she was going to use it in one of her art pieces. But what was funny was it actually was, I think, a 1/4 cup. Like it was a real measurement. So she knew, but also she knew ratios. She had a feel for it. But she would also, of course, use her hands and her fingers, right? So you have a pinch of this, right? And a handful of that. And the term she would use was the Arabic term for the handful. It's called kemsha, which is a handful. So she would do a pinch of this and a kemsha, a handful of that. And so when I was trying to figure out titles, brainstorming, and also with my mother, who's very good with words, she was an English teacher and a writer too, together we came up with the first working title, which was A Pinch of Allspice and a Fistful of Lentils. And eventually I just cut out the pinch of, just because it was already kind of long with the Syrian Jew, and I wanted to get a subtitle in there so people had better understanding what it was. But that's how I came up with the title for the fistful, because that's how she would measure before dumping it in the pot.
I know that top of your list is preserving recipes and putting family stories down and assisting people to get their stories together. Because as time goes on, the immigrants move on from where they were and we lose these things. Have you guided anybody else in books of this nature?
In terms of preserving recipes?
Preserving their own recipes.
Well, I have been there was a number of years ago, I was once contacted by a Jewish family who came from a Hungarian background. And they contacted me because they were lucky enough, they had even more than I had, to have this journal of recipes from the mother's mother, the grandmother who came from Hungary. And she wrote all the recipes down in Hungarian. And they were translating it, but they wanted someone who had been through the process of actually doing their own family cookbook to make it happen and turn it into a family cookbook, at least, that they could also hand to family members. So They had this to refer to. So what I did was I actually went to their home. It was just outside of the city for a number of sessions where I recorded and kind of managed the process for them while they were in the kitchen recooking the recipes after they translated them. And it was a really interesting experience for me too, because I had done it for myself, but I'd never done it for another individual or family, also from a Jewish background, but also a different background. And the whole family dynamic was also interesting to me, because there's a lot of psychology that goes into it. There's a lot of emotion, there's attachment, and then disagreement. And I found myself at sometimes being more than just someone who was, again, just taking notes and what I was also doing is taking the recipes, testing them at home, and developing them into working recipes, because not everybody has that skill, which is a real skill of writing it into a real recipe that you can follow with steps and ingredients and amounts and so on. So, but I also felt like I was a referee when I was in the kitchen with them, because at some points there was real disagreement and they couldn't get it done. They couldn't even follow through. And that is a big part of it too, is going through all the steps, and it takes a lot of time and you have to make a lot of decisions, and there's no real easy way around it, and they had a head start because they had so many great recipes written down.
Right.
But that's one time I did that. And another time I was contacted, but it didn't work out because, again, I think for me to do it with them, because I think it is such a personal thing, and it would take my involvement. That's not always possible for me to do for other people.
Right. Well, some of your background, you did some food styling for the Food Network or prep work, so I'm sure that helped you.
That helped me with all the demos I have done since then. I learned the whole swap out thing, right? Where you have to create one dish in various stages and figure out in your mind, like, how do you do one recipe from beginning to end? How do you do it sort of halfway? How do you prep it so that the chef who's on camera at the time can quickly do it in a way that moves well and doesn't take forever, right? So that you really show and people have a sense of that they learned something. So I learned a lot from that when I do my food demonstrations. Yeah. And now also teaching, because I know I have to manage a lot of time when I teach.
Right. And I've sort of dabbled a little here, a little there, in food styling for traveling cookbook authors. So I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
In the stages, having it prepped, having it midway, and having the beauty shot, as they call it.
Right.
So more in your background, your great-grandfather was a rabbi. And like in Hester Street, the movie, where it showed the Jewish immigrants, that the husbands came to America beforehand to get work, to get things set up, that your great-grandfather came to the United States from Syria. Very reminiscent. Do you know the movie I'm talking about, Hester Street?
I do. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So when I read that in your book, which telling everybody there's great stories, family history, I keep holding it up. I love when recipes have backstories, and I sort of feel like I really know you now after reading, the book and going through all the history of your family and Grandma Fritzy. And she was a great artist. You put a lot of her artwork in the book. You did a lot of the illustrations yourself. When did your second book, Too Good to Pass Over, come about? And what was your decision there to do the book, or why?
So what I love about, each book also, I feel like there's stories within stories within stories. And maybe, definitely everything along the way in my life, whether it's what I studied in college or what I picked up when I was a graphic designer and illustrator in the publishing world, and specifically at Workman Publishing, each step along the way, I was picking up little things, sort of like a patchwork, putting it together like a quilt, and in a way curating something that was very personal. And so I see my cookbooks, each of them separately in different ways, culminations of things that I was picking up and learning all along the way that expressed, so it was a means that, or a way that I can bring all those things that I loved and learned together in one place. So for A Fistful of Lentils, this was bringing together my love of food, the food of my background, also the particular love of the Middle Eastern Arabic culture, which, like I mentioned before, I studied Arabic. So I finally, when I was studying it, it was more out of an interest and an intrigue, and my great-grandmother spoke, that was her first language, to learn it. But I felt I was excited to be able to actually use it in my cookbooks, even when I was doing research on the names of the recipes and things like that. So the first cookbook was what I see as the very personal thing, also continuing, which is part of the not losing things over time, continuing the loose leaf notebook binder that my mother started when she got married with her sister, and taking it another step. So she still has that book and still uses that sometimes to refer for the recipes. And then I made it, I published it and made it a little more complete, if you will. And that's what brought me into the food world, because I started to teach Syrian, and then I branched out to teaching all Middle Eastern, North African, Central Asian cooking now. The Too Good to Pass Over was what came together after many years of actually in the field, like cooking in different cooking schools, like the Institute of Culinary Education in the Manhattan and the JCC Manhattan, and privately and for organizations, and just creating new classes that I thought people might be interested in, and also introducing them new cuisines, such as Algerian and Tunisian and Moroccan, and what's just North African, Persian, Yemenite, Iraqi, of course, Syrian and Lebanese, and trying to also, for myself, learning all along the way, the differences and the similarities, what's regional, what's by continent, what's cultural. And Too Good to Pass Over came about because for several years, I would offer a Sephardic Passover cooking class that was very, very popular. And that gave me the idea that, oh, maybe I can do research, because this holiday, I love this holiday. It's my favorite holiday of the year. It's so many people's favorite holiday. There's so much to be done with it. It's very interactive. And I don't see many, there are some Passover cookbooks, but many more just recipes of versions of matzo ball soup, and not about, again, what are the different communities in, let's say, North Africa, in the Jewish communities preparing for Passover. And what I learned a lot of things that I didn't know. I misunderstood, even assuming something as simple as any non-Ashkenazic community eating and preparing rice during Passover. I just assumed because the Syrians tend to do that, but it's not true. So then I really but again, that took 10 years of research and writing, because it's a very, very thick book, like 600 pages. So, but it was more an expression of what I learned after years of teaching, researching, and writing about other communities, not just my own.
I was reading some of the posts on your blog, and it's come up about where you can get the books, Jennifer's website, which is very simple, jenniferabadi.com.
Mm-hmm.
All her special events are there. Anything you want to know is up there. And you have blog posts and some about Passover. So I sort of sorted through those. And a couple of things that I thought were interesting. Taking the children's hands and dipping them in the haroset.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to people?
Yeah, and that's actually what I loved about the book, which is what I wanted it to be, I wanted Too Good to Pass Over. I have a copy, by the way. This is what you could see how thick it is.
Yeah.
I want the book to be something functional. I don't want it to just sit there on the shelf. I want it to be used. I want people to be able to refer to it almost like a cookbook / textbook, if you will, because each chapter is a different community. And when I learned all the different rituals, let's say in the Moroccan community versus Turkish versus Syrian and so on, by interviewing over 100 people and asking them, what did you do for the days leading up to Pesach? What did you do to prepare for it? The day of, and the Seder, what was in your Seder plate? What rituals and customs can you share with me? What foods did you use on the Seder plate? And even what did you do at the end of Pesach to end the holiday fast, if you will, from chametz? And I found that there were so many great rituals that I didn't grow up with in the Syrian community that I learned from others. So there's certain dishes that I now prepare and I've sort of adopted for my own Seder, including rituals. And now every Seder, before we start the actual Seder, I take my kids and also my niece and any young kids that are present, and I take some of the haroset that I make like 5-6 different kinds of haroset, so many kinds, but I take the kind that has mostly with dates, and I make like a little bit of a sort of a syrup kind of thing, and they dip their hands in the date haroset, and each one that gets just a plain piece of paper, and they put like a handprint on it, and each of them walks home, takes it home, and we put it on our door, the door entrance to the apartment or the building or wherever they live. And the idea is it's marking your door from the plagues, from evil, from the angel of death while it passes over. It's sort of a very, it's like a ritual. And I really like that idea, both visually and in a way that represented a lot. So I took that and I sort of kind of made it my own, but also adapted it.
Well, it makes a lasting memory for the children. It's interactive.
Right.
And they're part of the celebration. Another thing that the Kurdish and Moroccan Jews did with henna. That they put
Yes.
henna in their hair, hands and feet.
Yes.
Prior to Passover. They couldn't do it on Passover.
Right. So, yeah.
And I thought I saw the on your website how they had the Star of David on their hand. I just, I love finding these little things. One thing that I didn't know about sitting Shiva, that you take round food, round people, not ground, but round. You take round food. Round food should be served during Shiva. I didn't know that story.
Continuous.
So,
yeah, continue. Judaism, in all its aspects, is very much into symbolism, right, and representation and retelling and having meaning. And so the story of life and the continuous story of life, especially when you get to Rosh Hashanah, is always present. But what I found about Passover is I knew it was important, and I love Passover, but the more research I did on it, the more I realized how much it played a role in the Jewish culture. I mean, it's almost like, when they say all roads lead to Rome, I found that all holidays and traditions either led to Passover or led from Passover. Even the counting of days and the fact that the day after Purim is over, you're immediately going down and then up again, leading to those days of preparing for Passover. And that's what I talk about is what are those things, not just the moment that you're sitting at the Seder, which most people know, but how many communities would do things, even in mine especially, from the minute that Purim was over. It's like starting to clean the house, every inch of it. This day you do this, tomorrow you do that. And it was taken very seriously because that was as much a part of the Passover holiday as was the first night of the Seder. And then in the North African community, specifically Morocco, how the last night of Passover, there's never a moment where things just stop. It just leads into something else. And so you have this holiday of Mimuna that's supposed to take place just as sun goes down after Passover, where the gates of the heavens are open and certain things are supposed to happen then. It's like the best luck. It's the best time. And it's a whole festival and a way of celebrating. But it wouldn't happen if it had not been for also Passover happening and ending. So it's just this constant, connection up and down that leads to the next thing. And that's what I love also about Passover is the story continues.
right. There's so much good history, good stories in this, and I don't have too good to pass over.
I'll hold that one up.
Yeah. And it's up in our column. And anything you want to know, reach out to Jennifer. She does classes, she does virtual, she's a speaker. So anything to do with the food history, the preservation of recipes from the Middle East to the Mediterranean, Africa, Central Asia, do reach out to her. You are was, I don't know if it's ended, a docent in the Lower East Side tours in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to Russ and Daughters and I guess the different places, somebody's knishes, whatever. What surprises people the most after doing that tour of the Lower East Side and Katz's Deli, etc.?
Well, when I was giving these tours of the Lower East, the Jewish food and culture tours of the Lower East Side, I tried to put my personal spin on it, coming from the food world. I think there was one or two other docents from the organization I worked for, Context Travel, that did it. And they had their personal sort of perspective. And my perspective was very much, it was a food and culture tour, but coming from someone who teaches cooking, researches it, writes recipes, and trying to always see the connection of the particular dish to a certain community or even individual and the context. So when I brought people around, going from Yona Schimmel's Knishes to Katz's Deli to Russ and Daughters, the appetizer store. And at the time when I started, there was still the Straits Matzah Factory, which was an amazing place to visit. It's since closed, unfortunately. I tried to not only give a little bit about the history of the actual facility and place, but talk about the food itself and how it came to be considered by not only those in the Jewish community, especially the Jewish American community, and usually more often Ashkenazic community, so Eastern European when you talk about the Lower East Side, but also in the non-Jewish world as being Jewish and Jewish food. So I tried to just do a little bit about how, for example, a pastrami sandwich or a deli would be considered or seen as something Jewish in the Lower East Side, and also the Knish. But also I try to explain how certain things, bring in whenever possible that there was also a Sephardic community down in the Lower East Side, even though it was much smaller. They did exist and had their own schools and their own synagogues and even their own restaurants. So I tried to dig that up too and share that information. And I hope, and I think people who have gotten back to me afterwards said that they really enjoyed the connections about certain dishes, the personal connections, and how it may have arrived on the Lower East Side and became part of the new Jewish sort of menu.
Right. Two things. I have a story about streets. A number of years ago, I can't think of the name, Wally. It was a local chef who was doing molecular, and it was down on the Lower East Side. So I'm walking with the girlfriends late at night. We're meandering, and we see streets, and we're looking in the window as they're making matzah, and a guy comes out and hands us the matzah. He sees us looking in. So that was a very interesting memory. And just to tell people that the major Syrian place was really Brooklyn. That's really where there were a great number of Syrian Jewish families. There's so much that I can ask you, but I see that we're running long, and I know you have a busy day, but I am going to ask you my typical questions, and you can pass if you choose not to.
Okay.
What's the best bite you've had all week?
Well, there were two things. One was my daughter had been trying to get her to learn how to make challah by herself so that she can become a master baker on her own. So I would say that her challah, homemade, was the best thing that I had eaten in the last week. And also a Syrian soup that I made for a client. It's a stuffed meatball in a lemon and mint broth that I hadn't eaten in a long time. So when I ate it, I was really happy because it was something I grew up with and hadn't had in a long time.
So that first bite floods back the memories that goes along with it, doesn't it? If you could give advice to your 18-year-old self, what would it be?
I guess what I would say is all these things that, I mean, at the time I was in college, I was at Penn, and I was just taking all these different classes that seemed interesting to me, not really knowing how they would come together, if at all, in something that I would do in the future, maybe professionally. I would say that all the art courses that I took, the history classes, the political classes about Arabic culture and politics, certainly the Arabic language courses that I took, would come together in the books, the cookbooks that I have written, and what I continue to do as a Middle Eastern food and culture researcher, writer.
Well, somehow or another, I think I just lost Jennifer. So I don't know if she'll be coming back. We'll see. But if not, Jennifer, it's been a pleasure. I don't know what the technology has done right here, but thank you for being on the show. And I couldn't get to ask you the rest of these questions. Here she is. There she is.
The internet just dropped for a second. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I think I don't know where I left off, but
well, you were saying that all the courses that you took in college, you didn't know eventually that it would lead to being the support and backbone to what you're doing in writing. I believe that.
And the food, right, exactly.
So, okay. Ultimate culinary fail.
Well, because I'm cooking all the time, whether it's for guests or clients or recipe development, I've had many, in order to get things just right. So one that came to mind, which may seem not like a big deal, but for me at the time, I was very stressed, was when I was cooking a Passover Seder. I'm hired a lot to do other people's Seders and do a Sephardic Seder for clients. So I did a brisket, more of a Sephardic style brisket, with dried fruit and other tamarind and other ingredients. And it was, of course, a kosher meat. The client wanted a kosher meat. And I added salt before trying it and realized later, because it was kosher meat, it was already salted, which is part of the kosher process. And I have to be careful how much salt I add. So it was too salty and I had to fix that. And it wasn't easy. And that was one big fail, but I managed to save it. But it was something it taught me later to be careful. And another time was a cheesecake I made where the pan wasn't a good pan, one of these quick release cheesecake pans. And when I picked it up, all the batter was all over the counter. So that was not a great, and I learned what I should do about that now. And recently, it wasn't really a fail, but we have a way to go as a family. We decided to do sushi, homemade, with the rolls and everything. And yeah, we realized that the rice, there was too much rice in the seaweed and too thick. So it was a lot of rice and just a little bit of like fish and stuff, but it was still fun. So those are just kind of.
If you wake up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would it be?
I am always amazed by people who are real linguists and can speak lots of languages fluently. So if I could be, and I studied Arabic, I studied Hebrew, I've studied French, my husband's French, so I have a pretty good understanding of French now. But I always really admired people who were real linguists and they could go easily between languages. So I wish I was that was really good with languages and knew several languages fluently.
That would be a great talent.
Yeah.
And my last question, what didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
I would say you didn't really ask me, well, you didn't ask me what my favorite breakfast is, because that's one of my favorite meals when I'm traveling. I don't know why. I just love to see what different cultures and people eat for breakfast. And one of my favorite breakfasts is, of course, in the more of the Eastern, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean style. So I love, of course, I love fresh baked bread. It's one of my most basic favorite types of foods. So either fresh baked pita or baguette or challah, like I mentioned before. Apricot jam is one of my favorites. So I've had that in the south of France, and I've also had something like that in the other parts of the Mediterranean. Greece, they have the great honey. I went to Greece last summer to Crete, and the honey with just a sheep's milk yogurt, homemade yogurt, and good cheese, and of course, a really good peach. I think if I had all those things, I'd be really happy. And that's a good breakfast. And that's the only thing.
I think there was some story when your great-grandmother came to the United States and somebody handed her a sandwich and it had pork in it. They got rid of the pork, but she just really enjoyed the bread.
Oh, yeah. She reassured, I think it was more on the boat when they were coming over, that she reassured my great-grandfather, her father, that don't worry when they gave us the bean stew or soup, whatever, it's okay because we picked out the meat or whatever. And he was just like, but he was more understanding than
Yeah.
you would think.
Jennifer, I thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and a number of curiosities that I found in here. When I say that, something I didn't know. So everybody, jenniferabadi.com, follow through, check her out, check her posts, recipes. There are also videos of her cooking Fezanjan recently. So thank you so much. And I have a couple announcements, and then we're going to wrap it up for the day. Thank you again. Good
Thank you,
health,
Dara.
good wealth. Be well. Okay, everyone. The Food Enthusiast is taking a short break and returning May 11th at a new time at 1 p.m. instead of 12:30. My guest will be Clifford A. Wright, who's groundbreaking a Mediterranean feast on the 2000 James Beard Award for Cookbook, as well as the Cookbook of the Year. Well, Best Cookbook of the Year, and then for the Best Food Writing, James Beard. Can't even read my own handwriting. Just released is an Italian feast that celebrates the cuisines of the Italian provinces from Como to Palermo. An illustrated culinary guide and reference book is meant to be most comprehensive book on Italian cuisine. It includes 1,000 recipes from the 109 provinces of Italy's 20 regions, and that is called An Italian's Feast. And it's by Clifford Wright. He will be on in 2 weeks at 1 p.m. If you need to reach me, you can reach me. My email is food@jmoreliving.com or Instagram @Dara Cooks. All shows are immediately archived in video form on JMOR's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com's website. Feel free to dig into our video archives of past shows. We truly appreciate it when you share our show with friends and family. May your plates always, always remain full, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us.